Don't wait to contribute. Just get started. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, don't wait, just get started. Let's go, everyone, for another episode of the Mere Morpheus podcast. I am your host here, Kyrin, live on the 17th of March, 2025. And as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I talk about how I learned Python to track my weight loss journey. Okay, no, I definitely didn't learn Python, and I don't really need that for my weight loss journey. But we will be talking about some coding and some weights today in this episode 8 of the Mere Morpheus podcast. So we're going to be really diving into the coding bucket today, the 24% allocated to that. We're going to be talking about why people should get rewarded for their contributions and in forgetting the forgotten programmers, as my friend Juan is saying in the chat here, how to measure their contributions with a weighting system, some examples of the type of contributions you could do if you were to join an open source project, the current status of people contributing, and how I intend to join their ranks. Ooh, there's a lot to cover on today. So let's jump into it. Who's going to carry the technical debt? Who's going to carry it? Who's going to carry the code? That's what I'm talking about here. And how they're going to do that without some sort of reward. Now, if you're like David Goggins, you probably don't need the reward, and your reward is, I don't know what, internal punishment for yourself, something like that. But there is a reason why normal people need to live in the real world and not in the fantasy constructed by him. And yes, I understand I haven't used technical debt correctly, but it just sounded nice, sounded like right. So we've talked about the capital and compute buckets in the 2 episodes before this, and it was quite good that I did that. Luckily, didn't intend to put it this way, but it's a nice segue into this bucket because we can see from 2 other main open source and crypto projects that the people contributing to that in the compute and the capital buckets very much got rewarded. So if we look at Bitcoin and Ethereum, with Bitcoin, it's pretty much only the compute side of things, aka the miners, who get rewarded, and that's with the block rewards. Whereas with Ethereum, which came slightly afterwards, was where obviously the miners were getting rewarded before they moved to proof of stake, but also the people who provided capital right at the start of the founding of the project, if you want to call it that. So we can see how both of them had compute and capital getting rewards for their effort putting in. But both of these needed a huge upfront amount of work in terms of the code base, in terms of the actual work by programmers being put in to create God knows how many lines of code are in Bitcoin Core, and in I think it's called Geth. GoEth is the main client for the Ethereum contribute system, and it's a largely thankless task if you think about it. You know, sure, Satoshi got in on the ground floor and he was mining. You know, what he got up to 1 million and something coins, but that's was largely thankless. You know, he bowed out before he got any of the praise, the props, and the monetary benefits for sure. And this has happened across time, and just seems to be a constant sort of thing that will happen. You know, programmers need to put in the work, and will they necessarily get rewarded from that? You know, sometimes they do. And look, I'm not discounting that people do a lot of stuff for non-monetary gains. And so, you know, the status that you can get from things, sometimes they would get rewarded in terms of sponsorships, in terms of donations from other people's generosity, grants, bug bounties, hackathons, external sources of funding. But you really come across this chicken and the egg scenario because the protocol needs to get widely adopted first before it's valuable. But are you going to work on something which you're unsure if is valuable, and you know it needs the kind of flywheel effect to go? And if you're doing all the coding and you're not getting rewarded as part of that directly from the protocol, then you know what? There's a very large time lag between you doing work and you actually being rewarded from that. And you know, once again, I understand not everyone works for the monetary benefits of things, but I also understand that people need to live in the real world, pay bills, and there is a reason and incentive why, if you're designing a new system, hey, maybe you should create one where the programmers, the coders, the contributors are actually getting rewarded for this. So this gets to the next section where you're just waiting for a mate. And classic throwback to an Aussie meme here. The weighting system for Morpheus, and the reason this bucket exists is to be able to reward the contributors of code who are participating in the ground level protocol. So basic high level details, much like the other two buckets, 24% of the total emissions of Morpheus token gets distributed to the coders. This takes place gradually and decreasingly over 16 years, with something special happening after that. Tune into the tokenomics episode in 2 weeks' time. But who gets these and how is, I guess, one of the main questions. And well, I mean, who gets it? Anyone who chooses to contribute. So you can be Anon, you can be Sudon, you could be Anton, little joke there, because Anton's contributed a lot, or Out and Proud on, I guess, kind of like how David Johnston would be. So how these get distributed, the 24%, the Morpheus tokens over this, is based on a weighting system that contains several parts. What kind of code are you contributing and how useful is it? Is this going to be done via a bidding process, like you'll say what you're going to do up front and you get a kind of an allocation of a weighting of what you will get for what you've done, or are you just going to do it up front? And is this useful across time and still being maintained? So essentially the system goes like this, and I'll get into the details of the weighting system very shortly. You commit code to the Morpheus ecosystem under the GitHub, and under a Morpheus reference implementation. So there's kind of 10 separate categories that make up the protocol of Morpheus, these being the smart agents, these being the smart contracts, local install, the TCM, aka the fair launch, the protection fund, the 4 buckets I've talked about, and also interoperability. And these at the moment have 7 different maintainers across these various things. David Johnston plays a part, but also some names that I've talked about before. Eric Voorhees, Ryan Condren, Anton, I believe, is one of the maintainers, maybe not, and a couple of other pseudonymous people as well. The categories themselves can undergo some changes, as this has actually already happened place in February of 2024. Yes, indeed, I have scrolled through the Discord and seen why these changes happened, and so, liable to change in the future. How you go about doing it? Well, the smarter and probably preferred way is to put a bid in for something to the maintainer of that repo. And you propose the work that you're going to do and how much weights you'd like for it. So you can say, I'm going to do this sort of improvement to the smart contracts. There's a vulnerability here. I'll get into more actual use cases of code and what kind of qualifies and doesn't qualify shortly. And you then just say, like, I think this is deserving of the equivalent of 50 more per day, something like that. And that will either get processed and it's a fair value. The maintainer thinks that's a fair value, or he's like, no, you're asking for like 2,000 a day. That's too much. You're gonna have to lower that or not do the work. So there's this kind of like negotiation that goes on. I'm not exactly sure how it works in the back end, but there is a form you can submit for this. Or if you don't like this, you could always just do the work upfront and submit afterwards and hope that you get some sweet weights. This is probably a bit riskier, and it'd be better to scout the landscape first to see, okay, is what I'm proposing to do actually valuable? Do people think this is useful and deserving of rewards and weights? If you don't like how this works, unfortunately, you're shit out of luck in terms of I have to submit to someone. It's there's someone who's controlling all of the weights and things like this. yeah, that's kind of how atomic governance works, and we'll be talking about that shortly later on. If you think your system of, let's take Bitcoin for example, if you think Bitcoin Core is based purely on meritocracy and of the code contributed, and there's no politics and there's no human element to it, you're shit out of luck with that as well. So in terms of the durability of this, you'll continue to get more rewards for your contributions to code, as long as the code you've committed is useful and as long as it's maintained over time. So if it gets made redundant by something, if you've made a smart contract and that is eventually completely rewritten or updated, your weightings will go from the system and go towards that new person. If it falls into disrepair because the protocol's moved on, because changes have been made, there's forks happen, whatever it is, and you're not there to maintain it as well, then you'll also lose your weighting. So it's a relatively simple way of getting immediately rewarded for something, and also an incentive to keep it polished and updated over time. So this is why people contributing code can get that, pay the monthly bill sort of thing. And then also if they've done really good work and are still maintaining that, they can get rewarded for that over time. So you can kind of think of it like a salary if you want, but you're, not submitting it to one big boss employer and where you get paid regardless of whether you're doing good or not. It's more based on the merit of your actual code and how it's working in. So how do the weights weigh in? And I kind of like to think of coding weights as the pro rata system for work. So much like the capital bucket is pro rata for monies. So how much capital you provided is you get a proportion of that based on how much you've done in comparison to the total bucket. So for the weighting system, just as a whole overview, there's 100 million weights. And just think of a weight as like a token for work, essentially. And, we're going to confuse things slightly here because we've got the Morpheus token already, but there's a token for getting this token. So in total for the 16 years, there are 100 million weights. Why not do it on just pure hours worked, you might ask? Well, I think right at the start, they talked about hours this is like in late 2023, early 2024, where, it was just getting off the ground. People were writing the smart contracts. There was no token yet per se, at all. And I think it's the reason it moved to weighting because they're a numerical representation of valuable code. And it's the valuable part that's the important bit here, because you can work on something for a long time. And if you're lazy, if you're distracted, if you haven't built up a base skill set beforehand, you can spend a lot of hours on something, but you can have something that's stupid, for example, that you spend a lot of time on and isn't valuable and is not useful. Should you get rewarded for that? No, probably not. You can have someone who only spends a couple of hours on something, but they've got a ridiculously crazy amount of skills and talent in that particular field. And even though they might not spend much time on it, they create something that's super, super valuable. Should they get rewarded for that? Yes, because they've provided something of utility. This is trying to get to the heart of meritocracy, for example. What about if you have people who are like, for example, there's a bidding process that goes on with this as well. So you can have people who are willing to, let's just take two equivalent coders. One is in America, one is in India, and they're both saying like, hey, both same skill set, both same amount of hours that they're willing to put to a piece of work, and they're submitting weights, and cost of living in America is much, much higher, and so the American coder is saying like, oh, I'll do it for 50,000 weights, and then the one in India is like, oh, you know what, I'd be still pretty comfortable doing it for 25,000. And so this is where you can get this competitive aspect of the coding as well, where it's not just about providing valuable code, but you have to do it better than the other person, and if they're willing to do it for cheaper, then and produce something of equivalent quality, then obviously it should be going to them. So getting towards the heart of the marketplace as well of programming and useful code. So This is why there is a bidding process, and the maintainer, if they want to publish a task, for example, and say, hey, this is something valuable that's needed, people can bid on that. I made the reference to Bitcoin Core contributors earlier, and this actually plays a little bit part in how the weights are distributed. So if you're looking at the graphs on the left here, or your right, my right, we can see that over time the weights decrease very exponentially as we get towards the year 16. So in the first year, much like the BTC, halves every year. So we have 50 million weights for the first year, 25 million for year 2, 12.5 for year 3. You can see how we're going here. 6.25 after that in year 4, etc., 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 all the way down to 1,525.879, and with some extra decimals after that in year 16. Hope you enjoy my quick and dirty graph that I've created in LibreOffice Calc. Let's go. Now, to be nitpicky, year 1 and 2 have kind of been combined to the 75 million because the coding actually began before the start of the capital period, or which was, as we mentioned, in February of 2024. And so the coding weights were kind of calculated from September 3rd, 2023 onwards, which was the day after the white paper was released. So it needed some work and jigging around. And once again, things are open to change. It used to be 50,000 weights at one point, but because people were basing that, like trying to do rough calcs in their head of like, okay, let's say one weight is equal to 0.0025 Morpheus tokens, or USD value of a Morpheus token at the time, before there was a market price for it. They were submitting too high or too low, and so it was eventually expanded. It requires some iteration to get right with these things. If you are a kind of maxi in the sense of, I can understand Bitcoin maximalism in one regard, which is you just want something simple, easy, and it's not going to change. And this is the ossification of Bitcoin that people talk about a lot. And I think for a global monetary system, that's a really good thing. And it's funny, if you come in nowadays, you just think like, okay, there's only going to be 21 million. BTC is only going to, have the halvings at X amount of period. Yet, if you were to go back into the messy days of, 2009 through 13, and probably even beyond that into the block size wars as well, you can see like Bitcoin was not a fixed standard protocol that's immutable in time and rock solid and things like this. Like, no, people were having tons of outsized impact on it. There was politicking within there, all sorts of stuff going on. So it's funny, like hearing of the immaculate conception of Bitcoin that I've heard people talk about before, and it's like, God, that's not true. But once again, also with the Morpheus, there is a staking system with a power factor, so identical to the capital bucket, which is been implemented to incentivize long-term holding and disincentivize short-term dumping. So now, coders and capitals could both claim their tokens starting on the same day. So this was May 8th, 2024. As expected, if you see in your little middle section here, there was a lot of work done in that early 2024 period, and it's tapered off in terms of commits to the GitHub over time, just as the code base, I guess, is a lot more rock solid, and there's now other important things to work on in terms of the compute going live and builders going live, which is happening 2 days ago, I think. So we can kind of see like, okay, over time, there was a lot happening right at the start. I think this will probably pick up over time again. And that there's, as more cool agents are coming out and more infrastructure is needed to be built as the protocol needs to adapt, there's probably going to be more happening over time. A final little note of the weighting system is it's done on a monthly basis in terms of how the bids are accepted, weights published, etc., etc. You can see that down below. And then I think there's also like a rough periodic look back at old code to see what's deprecated, what's redundant, what's etc., etc. over, I don't know, something like a year-long period. A lot of this is, once again, with open source, like you can jump in, you can see the weights, you can see what people have contributed. Is it useful code or not? It's all transparent and out there. I'm sure there are like back channels in terms of people talking to one another, but I don't think there exists a perfect system where that happens or not. And so this is one of the fairer ones where I've seen it's as open as it can be without it turning into ridiculousness. Much like there is no perfect government, there is only less worse ones, or less evil ones. Let's jump into some of the examples of coding. How have people contributed? How perhaps you might want to do in the future. Luckily, there's many ways to do so, ranging from programmer extraordinaire to podcaster simpleton. Chuck my hand up over here. And look, obviously all the smart contracts, things like that are for advanced users. I can't even code. I tried learning Python once. I hated it. I didn't enjoy doing it. I'll stick to learning, regular languages. That's much more fun and interesting to me. But there's a list of things that you can do, from being the extraordinaire to just the simpleton, able to use GitHub and maybe do a commit. And so you can have front-end dashboards, aka websites. So if you're creating something like more.org, Morelord, the More Builders website, the Git book, all these sorts of things, that can be a valuable way of contributing code. MRC proposals, so Morpheus request for comment proposals, documentation cleanup, auditing of smart contracts, uptime reporting, or even things like the logos, because they were created and then submitted to the GitHub, I think qualify under that. Not exactly sure of that one. And look, there's many ways of contributing to a project without its qualifying for code as well. So that it's not like a free-for-all, be-all. For example, this very podcast, I don't think this fits into any of the buckets particularly. In terms of just providing the educational content via video and audio. Yet there are other ways of where you could perhaps team up with someone. So say you've got a talent in graphical design. You might not be able to use GitHub, submit things to there of creating something like that. But if you team up with someone who can do that and you create a front end like Morelord, then that's a valuable way of contributing to the system, and you can get some weights distributed via that way with a person and perhaps have an agreement with them. Once again, this is open to anyone, so you could be the lone individual anonymous coder. You could be a company that started and particularly working on open source. Take Red Hat, for example, or something like that. There's many different ways of contributing to an open source project, and this is just one where you have a chance of being rewarded for that, for your not only like upfront work, but work that you have also done in the past. So yeah, a couple of different ways you can contribute like that. Current stats, where are we at? And the how-to almost. So as of recording, there are 380 contributors, with I think 231 of them still being active. I'm not exactly sure what active means. Probably that means like they've used GitHub in the last month or something like that. Transparency with all of this is super, super important. So there's a couple of places you can go see the weights, who has contributed, their wallet addresses, and I believe the work that they requested for that. So there's snapshots of what they actually have done. So if you go to morelord.com, there's a section on there, or morestats.info. You can also go there and see like the power factors, for example. So you can see what I think is rather encouraging, that many of the contributors who've submitted code have also staked their staked with the power factor their more weights, their more rewards, aka they have said, I'm not going to claim these for 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, whatever they chose. And if they don't claim before then they get an additional bonus on top of that. So probably the main area to join if you're wanting to be, you're interested, you're like, okay, I want to join into contributing to Morpheus. More.software. This is where you can connect your GitHub account and start to submit bids for work or requests for completed work, something like that. It also explains the staking system, which I just mentioned previously, and that's probably the easiest way to jump in and get it. I'd also encourage, just sending a message in the GitHub. Once again, it's probably better to scout a little bit and see like, oh, I'm thinking of contributing in this way. What can I do, or what kind of weighting should I get for that, rather than just jumping in, diving in, and creating something that's already been created or that's not even useful at all. So I'm doing my part. You want to contribute some code. How do you go about doing that? Well, I think the overall meta of this, the kind of conclusion is just have a crack. So you don't need to ask. You don't need permission. If you have an idea, just go about it. I actually wanted to try and prove and demonstrate this before I created this episode. I ran out of time, unfortunately, in the last couple of weeks. But here's some ways that I'm thinking of contributing. And first of all, I need to really learn how to do a pull request and a commit. I think I've done one once before, and I'm not sure I did it right. And that was for the Podcasting 2.0 project. But there's two tasks that I've set for myself over these kind of coming months before I start traveling. One is, as you saw in the white paper pill episode that I did, there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of like wonky with the white paper that is on the website, in terms of not the very original one, but the modified one. I've got a whole list on my phone here of things that need updating with that, from simple spelling mistakes to fundamental like wrong numbers and things like that. So I have asked around, is that useful getting that updated? Yes, was the answer. And I'm just going to go about doing that when I have some time. The other one is also just documentation, because I'm going through so much of the GitHub to learn about the particular aspects of the coding, the weights, the capital buckets, how it all kind of works under the scenes. I've noticed, so many broken links. There's broken links everywhere. So that's one of the other ones which I think, look, I don't know if either of them really qualify for weights. I intend to do both of them upfront and then ask for it afterwards, because I prefer the value for value system, and I like doing it that way, where I'll do work, I'll do reward, I'll do things, and if I get rewarded afterwards for that, that's very, very nice. And yeah, that's how I intend to do my part and contribute to the Morpheus ecosystem. Hopefully, I can report back in a couple of weeks and say that I actually have done that, and that I didn't get lazy or run out of time, or etc. etc. So I hope that was a good overview of the coding bucket for you. And this is a value for value podcast. I do all of this upfront, so it should be available anytime, anywhere, for anyone, much like being able to contribute code to the Morpheus ecosystem is. Now, with all of this, instead of getting weights or anything like that, I just ask that for the value that I provide you, that you provide some back to me. Many different ways you can do this. If you want to do it via your time, sub to the channel, or to the audio podcast that I put out. Share this with a friend. Word of mouth is super important for podcasts like this, of a like, providing feedback, joining me on the live like my friend Juan did here today, which I'm doing 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on Mondays for the next foreseeable future. I've got 9 more episodes max until I start traveling. So I'll be here for another couple of months, but after that, I'll be traveling for a bit, and the podcast will go on hiatus, and we'll end season 1. So that is just FYI. You can do this via talent, graphics. If I've got any problems with the audio quality that you've noticed, if you want to contribute memes to the topics that I'm talking about, providing answers to the stuff that I'm asking in Discord, or hell, even the Mere Models podcast website, we need to update at some point. It's way overkill for what we need. If you're a website designer, you want to help us out with that, and that would be amazing. And getting the Mere Morpheus on there, for example, which it isn't, would be super, super valuable. And then finally, a treasure of being able to support financially what I'm doing here. look, you can send more to the address that I've got down in the show notes, which is my, I guess, community donation section. I had a look this last week, didn't get any. That's a shame. You could use me for a staking reference if you're thinking of providing capital. And providing that, I get a little bonus, I think, if you do that. There is also a PayPal link down below. And if you go onto a podcasting app like Fountain, you can stream in Satoshis, aka Bitcoin, and send that to me via Lightning, which is very much appreciated if you're using any of the new Podcasting 2.0 apps and able to reward creators in that way is very, very awesome. There's other podcasting apps like TrueFans, Podcast Guru, Podverse, Castamatic, which also do similar things. So it's not just trying to feed you into just one one little app or one place. It's a protocol as well. So yeah, look, just a reminder: the podcast goes away if I don't get any value back from this. I'll certainly finish season 1, but if I over the time period, especially while traveling, see that people aren't interested in this, that the information, the value that I'm providing you here is useless, and I'm not hearing from anyone about it, the podcast goes away and I don't start season 2. So there's just a reminder, I'm a person just like all of you at home, and talking into a black box of not hearing from the people who are consuming the content, and them letting me know it is valued and that you enjoy it. Look, if that's the case, that's fine. I'll obviously just say this wasn't valuable enough and it's not worth my time to continue it. So if you want to reward me for that, I don't have any weighting system over here. My weighting system is the value for value method. So hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Ciao for now. Kyrin out. Bye.